Moving on from the P mode of your camera, Aperture Priority is very popular with landscape photographers for the simple reason that it allows you to control, as the name implies, the aperture of your lens. Now, what the aperture actually dictates is how much light is entering the camera body, but also how much of your image is actually in focus. And this is what's so incredibly important for landscape photographers. Generally with landscape photography, you're looking for front to back sharpness, so you want your foreground interest to be nice and sharp, and you want everything right in the distance, a bit like the trees here. You want everything in focus. But conversely, there are times when you want to break those rules, and you may only want to have, for example, the small tree at the front, perfectly pin sharp, and everything else just going buttery smooth. And this is where Aperture Priority comes into its own, because it's the most simple way to control your aperture. Now, if you look at the Aperture Priority, you will notice, if you set it to the AV mode on your camera, that depending on your lens, you can go from a low f number to a high f number. Now, at the moment, I'm shooting with a 50mm 1.8, simply because I wanted to try and throw the background out as much as possible for the purpose of this video. So my lens will go from f1.8 all the way up to f16. Now, the lower the f number, the less in focus. Now that's nice and simple, isn't it? So f1.8, you can have an incredibly thin depth of field, and that's what we're controlling the depth of field. So f1.8, you got this much in focus. f8, you get this much in focus. And f16, you start to get this much in focus, and so on. Now, the problem is that you're controlling the aperture on your lens, and as I mentioned earlier, that controls how much light is actually coming into your camera. Now, confusingly, the lower the f number, the more light you're allowing in. So at f1.8, you're allowing loads of light in. At f16, f18, f20, you're allowing a very, very small amount of light to come in. And that can introduce camera shake if you're using your camera handheld. Now, a way round it is to put your camera onto auto ISO if you're shooting handheld, and your camera will compensate. It's not ideal, and this is why some people prefer to use shutter priority. But generally, on a tripod, which if you're shooting landscapes you probably will be doing, you don't have to worry about that. So keep your ISO down to the lowest possible, simply because you're not worried about camera shake. You're worried about the depth of field. Aperture Priority mode is the mode for controlling depth of field. So it makes sense, if you're taking so much control about how much you've got in focus, to slow things down and to put your camera on a tripod. That doesn't mean you have to. Sometimes when I'm shooting weddings and it's particularly low light, I will put my camera down to f1.8, f1.4, depending on the lens, and I'll just go around like that in Aperture Priority mode and let the camera work out the appropriate shutter speed that's required. Now, one thing you want to keep in mind when selecting an aperture is that you want to try and avoid using the highest f number available, i.e. the smallest aperture. Now, there are a few reasons. First of all, if you're using a very small f number, you're blocking out a lot of light. So unless you want to do really long exposures, that's generally not a good idea. But the main one is because your lens generally at the highest f number, the example of this lens is f16, if I was to use my zoom is f22, at the highest f number possible, it's generally the softest the lens will perform. You know, these lenses aren't designed to perform that well at the outer limits. And in many cases, the other way around, shooting f1.8 is not going to produce the best results, and actually f2 would be better. So what you want to try and do is select an aperture that will give you front to back sharpness and cut it off at that point. So a good way of doing this is to shoot, say, take a test shot at f8, zoom in on your screen, have a look around. If everything's looking sharp, great. If not, then increase it to say f14, f16. Just build it up slowly until you hit that sweet point where everything is in focus. And then maybe take one more shot past that, just as a bit of a safety net. And then maybe take one before as well. So, you know, if you think f14's looking okay, then do one at f12, f14, f16. Bracket your aperture, and then choose which is the best one. But do try and avoid shooting at f18 or f20, even though sometimes you will have to do that. So hopefully from this video you will see that Aperture Priority is a fantastic mode for taking control of your depth of field when using your camera, and it is yet another small step in taking full control of your camera. If you like this video, please consider subscribing, and I'll see you in the next one.